Welcome back everyone. Today we're going to be talking about data type. In our previous classes we talked about echo, print, commenting a line of code, and also variable, where we have the global variable and the local variable, and the global and the index, and different ways of using our global and local variable scope. Now today we'll be talking about data types. Before we go into the course, data, a piece of information or raw facts that are gathered from the user, and each data has a different type in which it represents and a different form in which it stands for. Now, for data types, the very essence of variables are for storing data of various types. Like I mentioned, we have different type of variables or data that are supported by PHP. We have the string data type, integer, the float, the boolean, the array, the object, the null, and the resources. So we'll be going further to tell you about more. Strings. Strings data type. A string is a series of characters, where a character is the same as a byte. So for a string data, we're talking about bytes of data. A string can be any text inside quotes, and you can use a single quote or a double quote for outputting your string. The example here shows a PHP string with a variable of A saying hello, I'm Power, and B saying I'm a backend developer at UDevop. So if we echo A and put a bracket and echo B, let's see what that gives us. Okay, we are back to our text editor now, and we've typed out this, and we'll save this and run it in the browser and see what it gives us. And it says, hello, I am Power. I'm a backend developer at UDevop. So we can see from this data type that this is a string. Strings are usually, or can I call it, they are texts that are written out. Mind you, if we have a number, let's say I am Power, let's say we add another line of text here and call this variable C, and it says I am 24 years, or well, 24 years is good. Say I am 24 years, and we also come back and echo this, copy this, we'll copy this and we repaste just because I'm lazy to type. I'll come to C and save it and come back to the browser and output it. We see that it still displays together as a text even though there is a number inside it. So for string data, whatsoever you put into the double quote is being read as a string and not as a number. So strings data types are usually used for outputting texts. Okay, the next type we'll be talking about is the integer. An integer data type is a non-decimal number between -2 or between a negative value and a positive value of every kind. It's a data type of number that is not having any decimal point. What are the rules for integer? An integer must have at least 1 digit. An integer must not have a decimal point. An integer can either be positive or negative. And an integer can be specified in decimal, that is base 10, hexadecimal base 16, octal base 8, or binary base 2 notation. But it must not have a decimal point, and it can either be negative or positive value. The function variable dump or varchar or vardump is used to tell us exactly what type of integer we are dealing with or what type of data we are dealing with. If we bring this to our text editor to edit, let's go, and I clear out all this we've written, and I say we have x, which is 199, and we say var dump. You see our suggestion is also doing that, var dump of x. We can come back to our browser and output that and see what it is. It's telling us that it's an int, right? So a var dump is the best way for us to output our data type to let us know what type of data type. Next, we'll be talking about the float. A float or floating point number is a number with a decimal point or a number in exponential form. The following example is an example of a float, and the PHP variable dump function returns the value of the data type and the value. So if we have another one, let's come back. We have, let's say we put a decimal point here and we come and output it out. We can see the floating point is giving it to the nearest zillions of thousands of decimal points, of decimal places. So a float saves in decimal place. Okay. Now we have the boolean. The boolean represents two possible states, true or false. Booleans are often used in conditional testing if it's true and false. So for boolean, they don't really store much information except for the values of things to be true and false. You can say if. They are used in conditional testing. Conditional testing are statements that comes with if and else. So you say if that is true, but if it's false, it echoes out that is false. Arrays. An array is something like a container or a box for housing multiple values in a single variable. Example below, we have a variable of cars which stores an array of types of cars. We have Volvo, BMW, and Toyota. If we use the variable dump to explain out or to echo out or to print out the cars, we can see what it's going to be. Array have more complex usage and we discuss in a later chapter. But let us go to our text editor and see what this is going to give us. Alright, now we are back in our text editor and we've written out the array. Now let's go ahead to our browser and output it and see what it's going to do. Now it's telling you that the array, or it's an array, and it has 3 elements in it, and it's telling us for arrays are usually counted in the -1 index. So the first element in the array is seen as 0, and it's telling you that the first element is a string that has 5 letters and it's Volvo. It's telling us that the second array, which is the array with index of 1, is also a string with 3 characters, which is BMW. And the third one, which is actually the index 2, is also a string of 6 characters with the name Toyota. So variable dump is a very good way to show us what type of data we are dealing with. Now we have the null. A null is a special data type which can have only one value, null. A variable of data type null is a variable that has no value assigned to it. Note that null and 0 are not the same thing. So if you assign a value to 0, doesn't mean the value is empty. If you assign a value to empty or a variable to empty, it doesn't also mean the value is empty. The only way you can set a value to empty, to completely empty, is by making it null. If we go ahead and see the example below, let's try our hands on it and see what we have. Alright, so we have it in our text editor now, and we can go ahead to our browser and see what it's going to give us. Reload it, see null. Null means it is empty. Objects and resource. Objects, classes and objects are two main aspects of object-oriented programming. A class is a template for objects, and an object is an instance of a class. When the individual objects are created, they inherit all the properties and behavior from the class, but each object will have different values for the properties. Objects and classes and resources will be dealt with in a later chapter as we progress in the course. But I want you to understand the different data types we have now. We have the string data for storing text or character text. We have the integer data type for storing numbers that are positive, negative, and not having the decimal point. We have the float for storing numbers with decimal point. We have the boolean, who can have a value of 2, true or false. We have the arrays, which are containers that can store multiple variables in one variable. And we also have our objects and resource, which can be used to store classes and for use in more object-oriented programming.